Well, thank you very much, Charles, from our Enugu Center. Diligent gentleman, always there every morning, every day, Sunday to Sunday. You're welcome to Abuja this Tuesday morning. My name is Mwabu Zenjoko. Now, have you heard, and I think it is true, that in a democracy, it is the responsibility of the citizenry not to be passive. They don't just allow things happen and things just go without engaging. It is also the duty, the constitutional responsibility of the media to engage, raise issues so that we keep leadership on the track of accountability. Now, today is 7 days since President Bola Ahmed Tinubu declared a state of emergency in Rivers State. I'm sure that you discover that emotions are cooling a little bit, nerves are coming down a little bit, and so this morning we will cool-headedly examine the state of emergency in Rivers State. Now, apart from Nyesom Wike, the FCT minister, former governor of Rivers State, Similaye Fubara, the governor, now suspended governor of Rivers State, the 27 members of the Rivers State House of Assembly, there are 3 other principal actors in the Rivers State emergency rule. And these are the Supreme Court, the National Assembly, and the presidency. What role ought these institutions to have played, either to avoid, to mitigate, or in fact declare the emergency as it ought to? This last clause, as it ought to, presumes that the way it was declared wasn't the way it ought to. Before we engage, before I introduce my guest, let us set the stage with this prologue. It is 7 days today since President Bola Ahmed Tinubu declared a state of emergency in Rivers State on Tuesday, the 18th of March, 2025. By the provisions of the 1999 Constitution, Section 305 empowers the President to declare a state of emergency in Nigeria or any part of the country. This power is, however, to be exercised under some conditions, and these are in case of a war or imminent danger of war, a breakdown of public order and safety to the extent that extraordinary measures are needed to restore peace, natural disasters or other calamities affecting communities or a section of the country, any other public danger that threatens the existence of the Federation, and a formal request by the state governor. Even if these conditions or any of them exist and warrants the declaration of a state of emergency in Rivers State, the Constitution sets out the steps that shall be taken. The President must issue a proclamation. This is not a hooded action, but public information. The National Assembly must approve the need for declaration of emergency. The President did not issue any proclamation, and according to the National Assembly, the President had consultations with the leadership of the National Assembly. These were hooded activities not known to the Constitution. The Nigerian public, which ought to be taken along via a proclamation, was thus ambushed and given a fait accompli. Since the declaration, the opposition to it has come in torrents. As much as the Minister of Justice, Lateef Fagbemi, has struggled to rationalize and justify the declaration, basing his position on the Supreme Court ruling in the political crisis in Rivers State, the apex body of lawyers in Nigeria, the Nigerian Bar Association has been unequivocal in its condemnation of the declaration. It has called it a constitutional infraction which disobeyed all the provisions of the Constitution. Even if this condition precedent for declaration of emergency obtained in Rivers State, does the Constitution give the president the power to dismantle democratic institutions like the executive and the legislature in order for the state of emergency to succeed? The MBS says no such action is contemplated by the Constitution. But who should have saved the president from this road to illegality? The National Assembly, which makes laws and is apprised of the provision of the Constitution, elected to collapse into illegality. The worst is that in approving post the action, the state of emergency in Rivers State, the National Assembly manipulated its own conditions to arrive at a dubious two-thirds of members who were not counted but known through the sound of voice votes in the chambers. What has happened in Rivers State is a coup by other name. It lays a dangerous precedent that in case of a national emergency, a president can sack his vice, dissolve the National Assembly, and become a sole administrator.
Now that we have set the stage, let me introduce my guest. This morning, my guest is Madaki Ameh. Madaki Ameh is a lawyer. He's also a defender of public interest, and he has followed developments in Rivers State passionately. We decided not to engage immediately it happened because I said this morning we are going to cool-headedly examine it. Madaki, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Chief Njoku. Always a pleasure.
The Rivers State House of Assembly no longer operates because it has been suspended. The governor and his deputy are out of office, suspended by federal executive authority, the president. When Obasanjo declared a state of emergency in Plateau State and attempted to dismantle the legislature, there was strident opposition because he was queried whether he was plotting and executing a coup. Does the Constitution contemplate and therefore give authority to the president that even if he wanted to declare a state of emergency, to dismantle the institutions of democracy?
Yeah, thank you very much, Chief Njoku. It's always a pleasure to be on the program with you because you always ask the right questions, and the right questions elicit the right answers. Let me start by saying that Rivers is a state that I have a psychological attachment to because it's more like my second state, my second adopted state, because I spent a huge chunk of my adult life in Rivers. I spent 8 years, apart from the NYSC, my NYSC year between 1989 and 1990, which I spent in Rivers. I also went back to work for Shell in Rivers, and I was longest in Rivers, in the stretch of my 12-year career in Shell. I spent 8 years of it in Rivers, and I have, real estate there. So, and all my 3 children were born while I was working in Rivers.
They might as well be Rivers State
citizens. So they actually ordinarily in a good country,
yeah,
where things are done normally. My kids actually ought to be able to claim Rivers State as their state of origin. But that's a story for another day. So, in talking about what's going on in Rivers right now, it's almost, I'm going to be as passionate about it as I would be if it was Benue State, where I originally hailed from. You get the point? Which is my state of, origin, in terms of the origin of my parents, and all that. That said, I think that what's going on right now, in terms of the state of emergency in Rivers is very unusual. It's very strange, and it's actually very shameful. You know, and I say this, you know, conscious of the weighty nature of the words I'm using. You know, I think we have degenerated into illegality as a country. We have degenerated into brigandage, more like, as a country. And we have also degenerated into a situation of executive lawlessness. You know, what Tinubu did a week ago by declaring that state of emergency, first of all, it was a self-imposed emergency. There was absolutely no emergency situation in Rivers. You know, the situation that that is going on in Rivers now is not anything different. In fact, it's not even anything near what we have experienced in other states of this country, and the government looked away. It is not even anywhere near the state of insecurity that pervades the entire country, where thousands of Nigerians are killed on a daily basis, and the government doesn't even as much as make a comment anymore about deaths on our streets. People get kidnapped on a routine basis in a country that's supposed to be ruled by law, and the president doesn't even remember that there's any such problem. So all that concerns him, you know, is to preserve himself in power, and then to issue proclamations and make appointments, mostly of his cronies and tribesmen, you know, and to run the country as if it's a fiefdom. And then at the end of the day, in a country that is actually in an emergency, because nobody goes to sleep with both eyes closed, in a country where the exchange rate has messed up the entire, economy of individuals and pushed thousands, millions of Nigerians into poverty, into abject poverty, in a country where the price of petroleum products was increased by over 600%, but the price of the incomes of Nigerians have not gone up by 1%. And even the 70,000 naira minimum wage, which they promised that they were going to pay, you know, for almost a year now, since that promise was made, the government has not implemented it. Meaning that they are claiming that there's no money to pay. The work of the civil servants and the downtrodden Nigerians doesn't mean anything, but they pay themselves heavy amounts of money on a monthly basis. Nobody even knows how much politicians earn anymore. And then you say that there's no emergency at the national level, and then the president is looking at some skirmish between a former governor and the current sitting governor, and that's a big enough emergency to shut down democracy in the whole state, impose martial law, because that's what he has actually done. You know, in doing what he did in Rivers, he has actually imposed martial law. He has undermined democracy in a way that nobody can imagine possible. He has destroyed the political structures, you know, that we hold dear and we're trying to harness. And then he suddenly, just by a very ill-advised, you know, I don't know where the Attorney General of the Federation was in all of this. You know the point? I asked myself, where is Lateef Fagbemi, for God's sake? Did he give an advice?
And Lateef Fagbemi is a respected lawyer.
Exactly. Was his advice ignored? You know, how can you be an Attorney General in this kind of situation and then you advise the president, don't do this, assuming that's what he did, and then the president comes, and because maybe he advised wrongly, because he has been on television trying to defend the indefensible. This is very embarrassing to lawyers. You get the point? I've been a lawyer now for 36 years. I'm a Methuselah in this practice. One of my classmates is the Justice of the Supreme Court as I speak to you. You get the point? So it doesn't get any better. You know, we've been in this arena for some time. You know, so we know exactly what we're talking about here. This is supposed to be a country ruled by law. But here we are, you know, this is, you know, the most fascist government we have ever had in this country. And you know, the consequences of what has happened is actually extremely beyond what we can immediately contemplate. What it means is that the president can wake up any morning, yawn deeply, you know, in boredom, and say, okay, well, who is next? And then he says it's Zamfara State. He sacks the governor. And then he looks again, you know, where don't I have political support? He looks maybe in the direction of Benue and says, okay, fine. You know, as for the governor and the supposed political godfather, who is the SGF, have not been in very good terms. So maybe that's another potential crisis. He sacks the man and sacks the House of Assembly. What Tinubu has done in Rivers is not anywhere near what the president of South Korea did, and he's passing through an impeachment process. I think that Tinubu deserves to be impeached for what he has done, and he also deserves to be tried for treason, because what he has done is actually to declare treason against his own government. And I will explain to you why. You know, I will explain to you very clearly why. The president not only declared martial law in Rivers State by sacking the entire democratic structure, the elected officers, you know, the legislature, everything that that the people hold dear to themselves. They went
in a democracy.
In a democracy. He also passed a vote of no confidence in democracy in Rivers State and by extension the rest of the country. And then to rub salt on the injury of our Rivers people, he did not find any Rivers man fit to administer the state. He goes to Cross River State and brings a retired vice admiral who was chief of naval staff, who is not from Rivers in any way. He has no connection, doesn't even live in Rivers State. He brings him and imposes him the way military heads of state used to impose military administrators. And then the day he's imposing him, he's releasing all the money that the Supreme Court had ordered should be withheld, so that the man can have unfettered access to funds and dissipate it as he likes. This is a very shameful thing to do. And then the bigger implication of what the president has done is that he has actually, you know, declared zero confidence in the institution of democracy in Nigeria. And there are huge implications, because if you are bringing a military man to administer an important state as Rivers, which is the treasure base of the country, where all the oil money that we are appropriating in Abuja, you know, by the National Assembly members is coming from, you know, Rivers and the rest of the states in the Niger Delta, you have to be very careful, because you are destroying the goose that lays the golden egg. Already you are seeing all the blowing up of pipelines. You know, 2 days ago it was the Soku gas plant. I used to work in Shell, and I know how important the Soku gas plant is, you know, to the economy of this country. They downplay those kind of stories now because they don't want the bad press that should legitimately flow from this illegality that this president has so ill-advisedly, you know, done. Then you say it's a military man who is fit to govern Rivers State. What the message you are sending is very dark, and I don't know whether people have seen the dark messages. We have recent history of military interventions in West Africa.
Niger sensitive.
Niger is there. Burkina Faso is there. Guinea is there. What's the other? You know,
and you are showing,
and then you are telling there's a message you are sending to the military that even though it is unspoken, what you are saying is that because you have declared a lack of confidence in the civilians in the administration of a component part of the federation. What you are saying in effect is that you also have lost confidence in your own ability to govern, and that, you know, maybe you are sending that kind of Niger Republic or Burkina Faso or Mali or Guinea type of message. And if that message is listened to by that segment of the people that you are already declaring confidence in their capacity to govern, and whatever happens, you have to take full responsibility. And that is why I am saying that what Tinubu did 1 week ago was actually a treasonable offense for which he should be impeached.
Now, just let me step in here. Treason is very strong language, but let me go over to the legislature. The president may be on a dangerous voyage. Any president anywhere in the world in a democracy could embark on a dangerous voyage. But the Constitution has provided a check. Just in case a president embarks on a rascally voyage, the legislature should be there to pull him back. To say, look, we are the representatives of the people. You cannot go in this trajectory. Come back. Nigerian legislature. I've looked up the meaning of the word proclamation before we came into the studio. I said, just in case I don't understand. The dictionary says formal public announcement. In other words, the president should have made a formal public announcement, now to be followed by an acceptance or rejection within 3 days or 10 days, as the case may be, of that proclamation. The president may have said that he made a broadcast, but the broadcast was purely a fait accompli. I have announced a state of emergency in Rivers State. Not that there is a situation in Rivers State to warrant a state of emergency. Then we go to our legislature. The Constitution is interesting. It says 2/3. Please, as a lawyer, how do you arrive at 2/3 by sound? Maybe that's a legal mathematics to it. How do you arrive at 2/3 by sound? Should 2/3 be arrived at not by counting 1, 2, 3, 4 and doing the calculation? The National Assembly elected to use audio, sound, to determine 2/3 of the membership in taking a decision of this weighty nature. Voice vote. Does the Constitution have any space contemplate audio as the means of determining 2/3?
Thanks very much, Chimjoku. As usual, your questions are always really interesting. Of course, just like Shakespeare said that there is no art to find the mind's construction in the face. But the world has also learned a lot of things from Nigeria. You know what I mean? There are a lot of things that we take for granted here. There are a lot of things that happen here which should lead to outrage, a national outrage on a serious scale. But it's just swept under the carpet and it's okay, well, what does it matter? You get the point. But in a serious legislature, any important vote will have to be done one after the other. They will take a roll.
And we know who stands where.
Here. And then the Senate President or the Speaker of the House of Representatives will call them one after the other. Senator Abamoro from Benue South Senatorial District. How do you vote? You say, I vote yes, or I vote no. They record it. We watch these things on CNN every time when the U.S. Senate or the U.S. House of Representatives
sitting on a major issue.
Sometimes they will sit till about 4 a.m. their time, grilling these issues. But unfortunately, we have a rubber stamp National Assembly here, both at the Senate level and at the House of Reps level. And I don't, with the caliber of people, especially the Senate President, quite frankly, with all due respect, what else do you expect? This is a Senate President who was actually not supposed to be there properly, so-called. He wasn't eligible. He ran for president, we all know. And then when he lost that nomination, through some level of political abracadabra, he went and ran for a Senate seat when the electoral law is clear that he wasn't eligible. He and Lawan, the former Senate President Lawan.
Yes, Ahmed Lawan.
And then somehow they went all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said it was okay, to breach a clear provision of the law. Sometimes it's almost embarrassing to be a lawyer right now. That's why I identify now more as a herbalist than as a lawyer. I think it's now more respectable to be a herbalist, that I am, than as a lawyer. Because when I go and introduce myself as a lawyer in some places, I don't like the kind of glasses that people cast at me. So in my Nigerian Law School class of 89 WhatsApp platform, I tell them, I say, please, you should not call me a lawyer anymore. Call me a herbalist, because I'm a babalawo. I think I'm happier with this my babalawo role, than this lawyer thing. Because at the end of the day, the lawyers have lost their respect. Law used to be predictable in the days of Justice Oputa, in the days of Justice Kayode Esho. You could see that judgments were predictable. But here and now, it's just almost a political abracadabra. What goes in doesn't come out in any way that is sensible or that anybody, can predict. The point. But, it's our profession, we're saddled with it. But there's nothing that says that if your dad trained you to be a plumber, you must remain a plumber until the day you drop dead. You might decide that, come on, this plumbing is coming too messy. I don't want to do this kind of work anymore. I think I'm going to become a mason or I'm going to become an electrician. You get the point? So we are trying to retool, so we can see. I'm not condemned to practicing a profession that has almost lost its luster. You get the point? Because there are so many examples that you can give. You know, Wike is a life bencher. Is a life member of the body of bencher. The body of bencher is the highest, you know, authority in the legal profession. Based on what? Do you understand the point I'm making? You know, we've seen a lot of things that have been happening. You know, I have a lot of respect for his wife, who is the Justice of the Court of Appeal, and a very responsible and sound judge for that matter. You know, but the man himself has not done well. You know, the whole crisis in Rivers State is a self-imposed, you know, orchestrated, you know, crisis that never needed to happen. But Tinubu, in declaring a state of emergency and removing Fubara, you know, and the House of Assembly members, and doing nothing to Wike's position as the Minister of the Federal Republic, you know, is clearly declaring that, you know, he supports what Wike is doing, you know, by imposing himself as the sole authority in Rivers, just simply because he says he helped Fubara to become governor. Everybody in this life must be helped to be something. We watched the videos of when Wike himself was introduced, you know, by Jonathan's wife, you know, and then brought to the power that be, orderly, you know, and co, you know, and made, first of all, local government chairman, you know, in 1990, you know, just when politics started.
Yes.
And then, you know, then one thing led to the other. You know, every human being needs a shoulder to lean on. So if you lean on a shoulder, then you become a slave, you know, to that shoulder that you leaned on. How subordinate has Wike himself been, you know, to all the people who have helped him to be what he is today? And how come he rides roughshod over the entire country, creates you know, orchestrates an emergency in the state that he used to govern? You know, just because he thinks that Fubara is a gentleman.
He's about to declare his
they know he's a gentleman, and then he says taking his structures away from him. What structure? If you are relevant, you will remain relevant. But you do not force yourself as a politician on the people. And I can tell you very clearly that the impact of what Wike is doing in Rivers is going to show in the 2027 elections. If Tinubu gets up to 10,000 votes in the whole of Rivers, he should go to church for Thanksgiving. Because the Rivers people have turned against them completely. Who is going to vote for them? Where is the vote going to come? And they can't manufacture these votes anymore. And they cannot rig this election that's coming. Let me tell you, they cannot. Nigerians have decided that they are going to win back their country. So anybody who is trying to rely on the possibility of rigging this election and then you know, announcing the results anyhow, that person has us to answer to.
Let's go back to legislature, because I'm very interested in the function, the responsibility of the people's representatives in this matter. The Constitution says the president shall make a public announcement. The Constitution says that the National Assembly will interrogate that proclamation within 3 or 10 days, whether they are in session or absent, as the case may be. But now, the public, the official information from National Assembly, official, is that the president had consultations with the leadership of the National Assembly. Is that what the Constitution anticipated? Definitely not, because that prejudges the situation. It's not every situation that you consult, because this is, you know, the proclamation as contemplated by Section 305 of the Constitution does not expect the president to actually consult politically, because in doing that, you are already prejudging the situation. The idea is that, you know, executive action is taken because the president on his own has assessed the situation and said there's mayhem in Rivers State. There is the potential for mayhem. You know, people are going to get killed in their thousands if I don't take action. Now he takes the action. Then the executive branch is supposed to calmly, you know, review that action, and then following proper procedure, review that executive action to see whether legislature now.
Exactly, that's the legislation.
And review the conditions.
Review the process that the president followed, and then come up with its own determination. And every legislator in that kind of situation has a voice for 2 reasons. First of all, the Constitution says 2/3 majority, and there's no way you can do this. They are wishy-washy. The A's have it, the Nays have it, that they do that so nauseating. Nigerians actually feel very offended by that. Their A's have it, the Nays have it. We want to see who is the A and who is the Nay by calling them by name.
And who voted where?
Who voted how? So that when it's time to punish them in election time, we punish them big time. You get the point? How can you hide behind a voice vote and say they have a 2/3 majority? What are the people who walked out of the session are in disgust Because I'm aware that in the Senate, some people actually stood up and walked away because they didn't want to be part of the illegality. How do you count their votes? Are those nay votes? Are those yes votes? Are they more in number than the required number that will make to test? So we are going to court. As Public Interest Advocacy Network, we are going to sue this federal government for the court to tell us how to test majority can be arrived through a voice vote. As I speak to you, the case is being prepared, and hopefully before the end of this week we'll file it. Let the federal attorney general who advised Tinubu to declare this state of emergency come also and determine for us, for Nigerians scientifically, how you can determine to test majority of a gathering of people through a voice vote, and then we will accept. So don't worry about it. You are not the only one disturbed about this. We have a Public Interest Advocacy Network which I convene, nationally, and we are going to court to go and test it in a cold-blooded way. Let the judges hear, the science of declaration of a two-thirds majority, just by saying the ayes have it or the nays have it. And that's already on. So
the other one is not constitutional or really it's not legal. It's just a matter of your own assessment. Do you really believe that members of National Assembly understand the weighty responsibilities on their shoulders?
I don't think they do. I actually think they trivialize it. Already there are media publications to the effect that each of them in the House of Reps got $5,000 to vote the way they did.
There's also a publication on this channel where they said we did not collect.
Exactly, but again, there is one who claimed to have collected, but that it was Salah, it was for the Salah.
Okay.
And then
so we share dollars for Salah.
So we started sharing dollars for Salah. And when they shared those dollars, the civil servants who were promised a minimum wage of 70,000 have not been paid up to now. And there is no explanation from this government on why they cannot pay an ordinary 70,000, which is less than the UN mandated poverty threshold. Poverty threshold is anybody who is multidimensionally poor lives on less than $2 a day. So the minimum wage of any country should not be less than $60 a day. Nigeria's minimum wage is just about $38 a day. A month. 38. So if to be surviving on a minimum wage, you should be at least earning $60 a month at $2 a day on the UN threshold. But we are here paying 70,000 naira and celebrating that we have done a lot of good for the people. You get the price, you can't even pay for a whole year, and you have no explanation. Every time people earn the same money, and they say, okay, fine, even give us that 70,000. We know that it confirms that Nigeria is the poorest country in the world. You get because we are living on less than our poorest of the poor in the civil service live on less than $2 a day, which is the UN threshold for poverty. But at least even do that one first. But every month the senators take 29 million naira as their paycheck every single month. That's almost $1 million a day. And then the members of the House of Reps, from the last information I have, take about 18 to 19 million naira every single month. What do they do? The same the A's have it, the nays have it. For what? We can dissolve both houses of legislature and nothing will happen. And this country will be governed even much better. Those guys are not adding value. Look at the nonsense that's going on now with the Senate president and his sex scandal with Natasha and co. In the court of public opinion, the man is guilty. And all this one of sitting tight, it's actually an embarrassment. If you want to carry out an investigation, by all means, step aside and let them investigate properly. What is he sitting down there for? You get the point. Nigerians are genuinely outraged, and we are disgusted at the way this country is governed. We are totally disgusted.
Don't mind that. Don't forget that we said we are going to handle this matter this morning a little cool-headedly. Because
it's difficult to be cool-headed about this country.
Because
it is.
Because it will be very uninteresting if democracy in Nigeria turns to a fiasco. It's very uninteresting. Well, we are discussing a little methodically this morning the Rivers State emergency rule. As I said, there are three major players: the Supreme Court, Legislature, National Assembly, and the President, the Presidency, in this emergency. The Minister of Justice, in justifying, in rationalizing the President's declaration, quoted copiously from the judgment of the Supreme Court. When it comes to law and the justice and the Supreme Court in particular, I approach it with considerable trepidation. It's not my area of It's not my forte. It's not my area of commanding understanding. So I am cautious. I have to allow Madaki. I'm going to raise it presently. But before I do that, we take a short break. I'll be back presently.
Beating about the bush.
Well, you're welcome back. I'm still with my guest, Madaki Ameh, a lawyer and defender of public interest. In the course of this conversation, he says sometimes he feels worried when he wears his wig and his gown. So he prefers to be called a native doctor, a herbalist, babalawo. Not to worry. There's things of this nature do arise in societies. Madaki, I have just said that I am always cautious treading on that area of the courts, the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court castigated the governor that he acted like a despot in demolishing the State Assembly structure. The governor said he acted on the advice of the highest level of works and housing in the state, and that building was a present danger to even the occupants. If that building had collapsed, he also would have been held to account that he neglected looking after the interest of the legislature. In other words, he has found himself between the devil and the blue sea. He goes this way, he's guilty. He goes the other way, he's guilty. And in the president proclaiming this emergency, he said something, that the governor did not invite him. Following Supreme Court judgment, following vandalism of oil pipeline, following... Please, sir, how safe could Fubara have been, and I'm being frank, with that Supreme Court judgment? Because if the condition, if the justification was the Supreme Court judgment, was the president wrong? Because the Supreme Court laid the ground rule. They said, look, the man was acting like a despot. The man had demolished the structure there, making it a little difficult, if not impossible, for the legislature, an arm of government, to function. And Fagbemi did say that governance stands on a tripod: the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary, and that Fubara had decapitated, had cut off one of the legs, and therefore governance was no longer holding. Can you help me? I want to be on the side of the president this morning, at least in this instance. Didn't he have a basis really following from the Supreme Court judgment?
Clearly, he did not. And let me explain. I think that the Supreme Court went far beyond what they were called upon to adjudicate. When they went pronouncing on things that were not even before them for determination. You get the point? In a situation like that, such comments are said to have been made per incuriam, meaning that this is completely irrelevant. You get the point? You're just waffling. You get the point? The Supreme Court should not waffle. In that particular case, I think that they were waffling because they were not called upon to determine whether it was right or wrong for Fubara to have bulldozed for the agencies of government, because it wasn't Fubara himself who was driving the bulldozer. You get the point? Because if there is a government report to the effect that that structure, because of the bomb incident that happened there earlier, was no longer safe, and and acting on that, through executive powers, the relevant agencies went and pulled down the building in order to erect a better one. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, and I don't think that the Supreme Court should have made it their business to be making those kind of comments when it was not part of the issues for determination. The important issues for determination, in my view, were glossed over. Can a member of the House of Assembly or any of the legislatures change party openly, declare, even swear an affidavit that they have changed, and then they still remain and keep their seat in spite of the provisions of the Constitution? That issue is still not decided upon up to today. So I think that this current quagmire in Rivers State was caused by the Supreme Court judgment, quite frankly. Caused directly because the Supreme Court justices abandoned what they were supposed to decide on and went, generally waffling and making comments that were per incuriam. You get the point? So at the end of the day, I think that, that judgment ought to be probed. You get the point? This is one of those kind of judgments that should be set aside by legislative action, because it sets a dangerous precedent, for future cases. You get the point? So when we get to that point where, of course, we can change a Supreme Court judgment, it's supposed to be final and all that, but if it works a clear illegality and its application on a wide scale becomes a source of brigandage, in other places that makes governance impossible, the legislature is doing their work, not the kind of rubber stamp legislature we have right now, should actually generate a bill that seeks to revoke, or impugn that kind of judgment, so that it can set the record straight. You get the point? That's the way the law works, in other places where there is a structure. But in Nigeria, every single thing is glossed over. And we're glossing things over and building structures that cannot support the superstructure that we're trying, to build for our children and their children's children. Right now, the only language that politicians understand is the language of amassing wealth. I'm stealing money, I'm making as much of it. Now they're bored with the billions, it's the trillions, they've gone into the trillion territory. How much money can a human being spend in a lifetime? And why are we doing this to ourselves and destroying probably one of the best countries that God ever created? And we're here, just being transient, being people of today, just because of what we can eat like a mesh of porridge. What are we talking about here? I think Furara is a great man. He was calm, cool-headed, in the midst of extreme provocation. You never saw him lose his cool on television one day. You never saw him dancing to the gallery of, as they paint them in the sweet house, childishly, as we see on television a lot of times. You get the point? He man kept his cool, held his job with dignity. You get the point? And kept focusing on how can I make governance meaningful to the Rivers people. During the last Christmas break, he paid an extra bonus, I think of 100,000 to every Rivers civil servant, to be able to help them to manage the challenges of Tinubunomics, which has ruined the country. People cannot afford basic food, but the budget for the president's food in his house in National Rock was 9 billion naira last year. How does one person and his family eat 9 billion naira of food in a year? In which way? You get the point? And that's why one of the cases we're filing this week, which we discussed in the last
yes,
is that we need to set a national minimum wage and a national maximum wage. So if we agree that the president earns 2 million or 3 million a month as the national maximum wage, he must feed the family from there. All of us are buying food for our family. Why would he not buy food for his family from his salary when he's just doing a legitimate job, just like the rest of us? So when that case is determined, and I believe that the judges of the National Industrial Court will do a good job of it, at least we will set the record straight. We want to make governance a service and not a source of looting. Because once the court determines what the national maximum wage is, by whatever name known, if you pay yourself a dime more than that, you are going to prison because you have committed an economic crime. You get the point? That's what we want to be able to achieve as the public interest. One of the things we want to achieve as public interest advocacy network. And there's a lot of public interest litigation that is required in this country, because every day we see a lot of lawlessness, from the people who claim to be ones ruling this country. We don't have leaders in this country. We have rulers. All of them are rulers. I want one of them to come and beat his chest and say, I'm a leader. Leading who? If you are leading, you must turn back and see where the followers are. Nobody is following them. You get the point? The national budget doesn't make any meaning to you and I. I'm 59 years old now. For the whole of my 59 years existence in this country, I have not felt the impact of the national budget in my life once. Every year they do this ritual of, appropriation, you say you spend this on this, spend that on that. We all know that they're not going to spend any of that money on any of those things. They're just going to embezzle the money. And that's what they've been doing for years. You get the point? So at the end of the day, I don't watch. They used to call me to come and analyze budget. How is this year's budget better than the one for last year? I don't do it anymore. You call me and say, sorry, let them implement it the way they want. Because it's a waste of my time. This year's budget alone was increased like 3 or 4 times. Every time they add more trillions because the figures are not adding up. And those figures are the figures of the padding that we're talking about. You pad budget, you start a budget from 30-something trillion, and it goes all the way to 50, whatever trillion it is. Now, nobody is interested. So you can make it 100 trillion if you want.
Madaki, let us start raising some hope, because there's no Armageddon yet.
Well, I think we are already on the eve of Armageddon.
Let us raise some hope. And the hope I want us to raise is, what can the Nigerian citizen do to help the legislature realize its critical position in safeguarding our democracy and ensuring that things are done right? Because by my own assessment, anybody can elect to be rascally. If you elect me as president, I can decide to be rascally because there are so much powers available to me. But somebody ought to draw me back, and that's the legislature. What can we as citizens do to help the legislature in Nigeria begin to perform its functions?
Well, that's again another brilliant question, But again, it goes back to the way our electoral system is structured. Do the electorates matter? Do votes count? Will votes be counted? Because you see, I see a lot of passion around.
And that is why we can say he made this gentleman, but not the electorate.
Wike came on national television and said he bought forms for
all of them.
Body who ran under the platform of PDP for all elective offices. That's an arrestable offense. They should have handcuffed him right from that television station when he made that comment, because what he's saying in effect is that he stole the money of the Rivers people and used it to buy forms in order to set up a so-called political structure. In a good country, the guy should be in prison. You get the point. But again, like all things in this country, some people are above the law. And even when they breach the law, nobody talks to them. They just ride roughshod over us. So to answer your question, the legislators will only be called to order if they are afraid of the electorate in their votes. But they just ignore the electorate. In fact, what tends to happen, and I've witnessed this a lot of times in my lifetime, especially since 1999, when this current, democratic experiment, has been happening. Immediately the elections are over and the petitions are over, you don't see the political actors anymore. They go into a cocoon. We have a senator from my constituency, Benue South, who has never organized a single town hall meeting. That's Senator Abamoro, the minority leader. One single constituency meeting has, like a town hall meeting, has never been held.
Where he listens to the constituents.
If you don't have a town hall meeting where you ask people, so how do you see the pulse of the exactly, what do you guys even want? What bills do you want me to sponsor? How do you want me to react in the National Assembly? These guys are above the law. They are above the people who voted for them. You get the point? And then they speak to the people through spokesmen. I don't know whether you are aware of the new concept of spokesman. You are supposed to be my spokesman, and then you have a spokesman. So when you want to speak to the people who voted for you, it is your spokesman who speaks for the spokesman. Exactly. So you are a spokesman, then you have a spokesman. And then the spokesmen are like political Rottweilers. They go on, they infiltrate all the media channels, especially WhatsApp and all of that. So all of these WhatsApp groups, they are there waiting for the slightest whiff of opposition. And I'm sure for this comment, when they are going to see it, you see how they will insult me. What they put now on me is that I never allow anybody to insult me and go scot-free. You insult me, I must have the last word, and I'll insult you in a way that will shock you. Because I'm not afraid of anybody. I don't need anything anymore from anybody, actually. You get the point. You give me an appointment now, it's just a bonus. I don't really need it. God provided all the things I need long ago. You get the point. More than 20 years ago. You get the point. And my needs are very modest. My parents are not rich, and we are contented. You get the point. There are 17 of us siblings from the same dad.
That's a number.
That's almost two football fields, almost two football teams. But we are very happy people. We are very contented. you know, we mind our business and we just run with our lives. Everybody is a graduate, by the way, of all the 17. But at the end of the day, what are you going to give me? Is it shelter? At least I have one house in my village, and that's my last bus stop. I don't intend to have a house anywhere else in the world, not even here in Abuja. I used to have a house here, but I sold it because my children grew up and moved on, and then the house became too big for me and my wife. You know what I mean? What am I living in a 5-bedroom duplex with a 4-bedroom boys quarters for? You know, when sometimes you will not be able to go to some parts of the house for a month, for 2 months. So I said, come on, we need a smaller life. And then we moved, and it makes sense. You know the point? It makes sense. And then, you know, so what are we talking about? What are you amassing all this wealth for? You know the point? And then, if you are amassing it from industry, from value that you are creating, I can understand.
I want Dangote to increase his money. I want Dangote to increase his money. We need more Dangotes.
Do you know that Dangote went to Pojo Automobile in Kaduna, bought the factory, and is producing? Are you aware that they are producing Pojo cars now in Kaduna from Pojo Automobile? I was shocked when I heard this. I went online yesterday and I saw the brand of cars that they are producing quietly. The man is not even talking about that. You get the point. Then he built this refinery. Was a big risk at the time when the world was turning against fossil fuels. He invested $20 billion setting up this refinery that is the biggest single train refinery in the entire world. Instead of us to celebrate it, NNPC is importing refined products to compete for the imported products from Dangote, from NNPC to compete with the Dangote locally produced, locally refined products that is adding value to the economy. Why? Because they are importing from Malta. They blend the products in a certain factory that is said to be owned by people who are powerful. Let's talk about that. But the point I'm making is this: we should not run Nigeria as a criminal enterprise. As it is right now, this country is being run as a criminal enterprise without any form of moral, standard. And it's not good.
Let me have a bottom line. In other words, our National Assembly, the way it is now, can only be redeemed if the electoral process is retooled and made more effective.
Yes.
The electorate, as at today, is not a major factor in determining who enters the National Assembly.
We are completely helpless. And one of the ways to do this is to level the playing field. Again, one of the cases we are filing this week against the government. The political parties cannot come and be imposing fines, more like, you know, on people during election time and say this is how much you must pay to be eligible to contest an election.
But that's the responsibility of INEC.
Of course I know, and that's why the court, we are asking the Federal High Court in another of our cases that were filing this week, you know, to determine that the political parties as agents, as organizations that are regulated by INEC, must all have the same nomination fee. And that anybody who earns the national minimum wage of 70,000 naira should be able to buy that form. Not the obscene 100 million, you know, that APC went and imposed as a fine on anybody who dares to aspire, you know, to run for president. And 28 people bought that form. In fact, I saw some of the politicians dancing with their supporters, you know, drumming as they go to INEC, as they go to the party headquarters to go and collect the form, and where they paid 100 million naira of money that they did not pay any tax on. Because, you know, that's actually, if only FIRS, the Federal Revenue Service, were doing their work, as they are buying that form, the taxman is waiting and saying, where is your tax clearance certificate for last year? How did you pay tax on this amount that you have used now to buy this form? 28 people bought this form. That's 2.8 billion obscene money. 99.9% of that money was stolen from the government of this country and from the people of this country. You can't prove they are the source of money.
Okay, you know, we're looking at how to save the legislature. But also there is a governance attitude. There is an imperial disposition on the part of the executive across board. Mm-hmm. Governors, the president, even local government chairman. I won't ask you how we got to that, but what do we do as citizens to begin to instill in our political leadership a sense of fearing what I think, fearing what the electorate thinks, being conscious that injuring the interest of the electorate has its consequences? Is there any way? Is there any way we can direct national conversation? Is there any way the citizen can do something? Because the citizen appears helpless, really.
Yeah. the politicians are so arrogant because they know that the citizens are currently helpless and that there's nothing they can do. We've heard that said before. You get the point. You try to challenge a politician and say, "But this thing you are doing is not going to take you far." You say, "So what can you do?" And they thump their noses at you.
And the truth is that
and the reality is that they know there's nothing you can do. It's therefore you have just one miserable vote, which you may not even cast. Can you pay transport to your village to go and cast one vote? It doesn't make any sense. You get the point. So the politicians already know that they keep all their money for that election night. You know, all of the deployment of funds to buy votes and to ride roughshod over people happens, you know, a day to the election. So they might be the most unpopular politicians in the world, but they know that because of stomach infrastructure issues and hunger, which they impose on the people, if they deploy their arsenal a day or two before the election, people will eat for the now, and hunger will push them, you know, into the polling unit, and the votes will come out, and then they'll carry themselves shoulder and say they have won again. How do you win a fraudulent election and you go and celebrate? For what? You get the point. So the key to it, finally, in my view, apart from leveling the playing field so that more good candidates can come out and the people can choose, you know, is also to ensure that people should have a retirement age from politics. In Nigeria, every politician can continue to contest election until the day he drops dead on the rostrum from old age campaigning. And all of them falsify their ages anyway. You know all the different ages that are there. Why can't we have a national retirement age of 70? That applies to everybody. Since this current president has extended the retirement age of judges to 70 years, professors to 70,
the politicians should also
doctors now to 65. You know, so it is selective. IG till kingdom come. You know what I mean? He looks at you. The president looks at you and says, "Come on, I give you more. Look at the.
I give you more years.
Look at the group managing director of NNPC. As inefficiently as NNPC is run." You know, the man is supposed to have retired since January this year. Nobody now knows where he's going to retire. You know, the man, even though the retirement age is 60 and the man became 60 in January. But everybody has kept quiet. You get the point, because the president has extended the stay. So the president now imperially determines who is working for government and who is not. Does he have any such powers in the constitution? No. But we have an imperial presidency here where everything the president does is the law. We can't continue like this. Before you know it, we have a terrible situation on our hands.
Well, before the king becomes the state, Madaki, the core issue we are discussing this morning really is the emergency in Rivers State. I wanted us to really examine the weakness of our legislature and all these things, but I'm sure that we have looked at the executive, we have looked at the judiciary, we have looked at legislature. My producer has cautioned me twice that I'm almost busting the seams. He wants to leave at least 3 minutes for other commercials and things. Madaki, the bottom line, what will be your word in assessing this emergency? Look at its import. Look at how to avoid it occurring again.
Thank you.
What should happen?
Thank you, Chibuyaku. As always. Yes, my last comments. I think that this has not gone too far. We have a proverb in my place that, you know, a journey that you have not embarked on for too long is not difficult to reverse. The president should swallow the humble pie, know that he has goofed real bad, and that this gaffe, in fact, this is not just a goof, this is a gaffe. This gaffe has exposed his weakness. First of all, has been intellectually bereft of the role of, you know, incapable of handling the job that he's doing. Because if you have an array of advisors, you should know those who are advising you right and those who are advising you wrongly. You get the point. If you are unable to tell between a good advice and a bad advice, then you are a bad ruler.
Yeah, but let me give you some information.
Yes.
One of the strongest credentials of Bola Ahmed Tinubu is that he's a solid Democrat.
I don't see democracy here. You shove aside the democratic structure in the entire state. In fact, probably one of the most important states in the country from a revenue generation point of view. And you impose martial law. And you put a military man there who has no allegiance to the people because he's a foreigner. He's from a neighboring state. You know the point? Now, you know what kind of democracy is that? The man has exposed himself in a very, you know, you never know. How people say if you want to know somebody, know the person when he's returning from the farm. You want to marry a wife, you get the point, and then, you know, you see a beautiful woman on Sunday in church. Wait until she goes to the farm and she's carrying, you know, yams, you know, or firewood.
That is the real person.
That is the person. Tinubu has finally demonstrated to us that he has never been a Democrat. He has always, there was one of the interviews he granted long ago where he said he does not believe in one Nigeria. I don't know whether you saw that headline.
Yeah,
it was there, and it's still there. I don't believe in one Nigeria. How can somebody who made such a comment anytime emerge as president of a country? How? You don't believe in one Nigeria, you want to be the president of one Nigeria, and you became? So there are many things. Honestly, I don't think this interview can end. So to answer your question properly, we are suffering the worst state of state capture at the moment. There are more powerful individuals than the entire state put together. Wike is one of those strong individuals in this country whose word is law. And then, because he has captured the state in the president, the same way that Elon Musk, has been struggling to capture Donald Trump, I think that we have our own Elon Musk in Nyesom Wike. And who is supposed to be my friend, as a lawyer, like me, and I have a lot of respect, like I said, for his wife, who is a very respected judge in the Court of Appeal. But the point of who is also a Chieftain scholar like me, went for Chieftain scholarship at different times, but we are all alumnus of the Chieftain program. You get the point, and that shows a level of intellectual capacity that is not normal. You get the point. So the wife is very intelligent and very good judge. But again, Wike appears, unhinged. I don't think he's somebody that anybody can actually advise properly, because he does what he likes. As my wife once told me that, one time to Igbo, like my wife is Igbo. Omi Fesuani, a man who does what he likes. I don't, you know what I mean? So maybe we should give the Wike a title of Omi Fesuani, one of River State, the man who does as he likes of River State. You know what I mean? I think that's very embarrassing. Tinubu needs to do something. You get the point. He needs to at least demonstrate a balance. Yes, all this problem was orchestrated by Wike trying to insist that he's still the Lord of Rivers, in spite of how he has ridden roughshod over people like Odili, respected people like Odili, his wife, retired Supreme Court Justice, all the people, who have, who are anything in the state have been rubbished, insulted, dragged on the streets. If the president is not showing bias and that he has been captured, he ought to also say, okay, if I've created, a vacuum in one end, I should also create a vacuum in another end and remove this man as minister. Let's even see how powerful he is out of government. You get the point? Because the real test of a politician who has a backing is when he's no longer in charge. So if they take him away and say, okay, fine, you don't have an official role anymore, and all this paraphernalia of police carrying gun up and down following you, unless you are paying for it with your own money, which you can in this country actually. If you need a battalion of policemen, you can actually get it. You get the point? So you can probably have those people following him. But honestly, if I were a footballer, I will never let him come to the state. How? Where will you pass? Is that not what he did to Amechi and the rest of the people before?
Okay.
Sometimes to myself, just stay where you are.
I've been told twice that I'm no longer disciplined. Let me discipline myself. Well, in the past 55 minutes or so, I've been, more than that really, I've been conversing with Madaki Ameh, a lawyer and public interest defender. And as I said at the beginning of this program, we are not being emotional about the issues in Rivers State. We're trying to take them on rationally. And the bottom line this morning is that certain things were not done right. And there's need to right those wrongs. That the mark of leadership, the mark of character, is that when you see that you have wrong stepped, there's no shame in stepping back. The president can still fix things and let this democracy have some respect and some honor from the people. That's the much we can do this Tuesday morning. On your behalf, let me thank Madaki. Madaki, thank you for coming to the program.
It's always a pleasure.
Right. And the conversation never stops, of course. Tomorrow, we're on here with yet another issue in the polity. And again, my name never changes. It remains Mwaboys and Joko. Good morning.